Okay, it has just struck 8 p.m. by my clock here on the East Coast, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to Environmental Defense Fund's online webinar on reducing our exposure to toxic chemicals and pollution. My name is Sam Perry and I'm the Director of Membership here at EDF. Many of you receive emails and postal mail from me, and I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for not only supporting EDF with your donations and your activism, but in particular for taking time out of your busy evening to join us tonight to hear about our toxics work. More than 500 of you registered for tonight's webinar, which I think is a record for us. And I looked it up. We have supporters from 44 states. We even have registrants from 13 countries. So this is truly a global webinar. From Mexico to Canada, to Greece to Ghana, and Belgium to Costa Rica. So welcome everyone. It's a great turnout, and I'm so proud to be a part of this amazing community of caring people who understand the power of innovation, partnerships, and the pragmatic, step-by-step problem-solving approach that EDF is known for in taking on the world's most serious environmental problems. Before I introduce Sara Vogel, our staff expert for tonight's presentation, I just want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping matters. First, the presentation should take about 20 to 25 minutes, which should leave plenty of time to answer your questions submitted through the webinar chat feature. To submit a question, it's really simple. All you have to do is enter it at any time in the Q&A box, which should appear on your screen in the upper right-hand corner. If you don't see the box, simply click the red Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to bring it up. We have several membership staff ready to put your question in the queue, and we look forward to hearing from you. Finally, please be aware that we are recording this event to make it available online for those who could not join us tonight. So if you want to review this in more detail later, you will have that opportunity. With that, it is my great honor to introduce Sara Vogel, Director of our Health Program. Sara received a PhD from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. She also holds a Master of Public Health. And she is the author of the book, Is It Safe? BPA and the Struggle to Define the Safety of Chemicals, published in December of 2012 by the University of California Press. And she is here tonight to share with you all the amazing progress you're helping us achieve in our health work, specifically on strengthening standards for toxic chemicals in the marketplace, chemicals every American is exposed to day in and day out. So without further ado, Sara, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Thank you all. Again, I just want to thank you as well for joining us from so many different places and taking time out of your busy schedules. I'm so pleased to spend the next hour with you all. As Sam said, I'm going to share with you our efforts to really support healthy people and communities. So it turns out that we are what we make and what we eat and what we drink and what we breathe. So when American blood and urine is actually analyzed by the Centers for Disease Control, or the CDC here in the United States, they find the fingerprints of coal-fired power plants and diesel trucks, plastics, fragrances, preservatives, chemicals used in food and packaging, cleaning products, inks, and garments. This chemical soup is present in pregnant women and can be transferred to the developing fetus. All told, well over 230 industrial chemicals have been detected in the cord blood of newborns in the United States. So what's the risk of this exposure? There's emerging science that is increasingly linking even everyday chemical exposures, even those at low levels, particularly during critical period of development in our lives, to breast and prostate cancers, infertility, Parkinson's disease, behavioral and learning problems, and more. And the problem is we've had a regulatory system and a marketplace that puts chemicals out there in the environment first and maybe, just maybe, ask questions about the long-term health consequences later in life. So tonight I'm going to talk about EDF's work to tackle this problem, to reduce our exposure to toxic chemicals and build a future where we all have access to a healthy environment. So we're pursuing two levers of change. First, securing strong health protective rules. This means reforming the policies that govern the use of chemicals. Secondly, we're spurring corporate leadership to get harmful chemicals out of everyday products and, importantly, to send a strong market signal for safer innovation. And third, accelerating the advancement of scientific research on the health effects of chemicals. Because the truth is we know enough to be concerned, but far too little about the scope of this problem. So I want to share just a few highlights of the progress that we're making and challenges ahead as we strive to build healthy environments and people. So the main chemical law in this country is very badly broken. The Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA as it's called, was passed in the United States in 1976. And it covers most chemicals used in industry and in commercial and consumer goods. The exception to that would include things like drugs and cosmetics, food additives, and pesticides. But there are about 80,000 chemicals available for use on the market today. Since the law passed nearly 40 years ago, it's proven to be toothless. Less than 3% of those 80,000 chemicals have ever been adequately tested for health and safety, and only 5 have ever been regulated. The government has been nearly powerless to restrict even known deadly carcinogens such as lead, formaldehyde, and even asbestos. And then during the same period of time, chemical production has seen a 25-fold increase and is expected to see tremendous growth over the next 30 to 40 years. So let me just give you an example of how this law has failed to protect us. Some of you may recall that in the 1970s, there was evidence that some toxic flame retardants used in children's pajamas could cause gene mutations. At the time, that chemical was banned, but they basically found new uses in foams used in our couches, pillows, and a host of children's products. When we sampled a number of couches in different congressional offices, we found that about half of them contained flame retardants. And when I've told people this, some of them said, well, okay, that might explain a few things. But we actually wanted to give the members a real feel that this was right in their backyards. And the real problem is that the vast majority of Americans now actually carry significant amounts of these chemicals in their bodies, and we're learning that they are capable of disrupting children's brain development. And for decades, the problem's been that as we found one flame retardant chemical to be toxic, we've simply replaced it with another similarly toxic one. So to deal with this problem, for the past decade, EDF has been calling attention to this problem, outlining the critical failure of the law, and building political pressure to reform it. The first bill was actually introduced all the way back in 2005, followed by a bill introduced in the next 6 successive Congresses, all by Democrats. In 2013, the first bipartisan bill was introduced by the late Senator Frank Lautenberg, a Democrat from New Jersey, and Republican David Vitter from Louisiana. After 2 years of bipartisan negotiations, led by Senator Tom Udall, a Democrat from New Mexico, who took the lead for the Democrats after Lautenberg passed away, and Vitter, the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety Act was introduced in March of this year and was a very different bill. That bill was passed out of its committee just this spring with further strengthening changes that actually secured additional Democratic support. Today, the bill has 41 co-sponsors in the Senate. That's nearly evenly divided between the parties and is poised to be taken up by the full Senate potentially this summer. That bill would, for the first time, give EPA a clear mandate to evaluate the safety of all chemicals, including new ones, the some 700 chemicals that come onto the market every year, as well as those already on the market. It sets a safety standard that would be based purely on health and not cost, as it is today, and would explicitly require the protection of vulnerable populations like pregnant women, children, and fence-line communities that can experience higher exposures. It gives EPA deadlines and resources, neither of which it has in the current law, as well as the greater authority to require chemical testing. It's not perfect, but it would significantly strengthen the current law today. Just this past Tuesday, the full House passed its own legislation, and all of this is setting the stage for the best chance in a generation to strengthen this law. And our goal is nothing short of getting the strongest bill possible on the President's desk by the end of this congressional session. We've never been so close to passing major environmental legislation, but we still have a long way to go. So one of the major drivers that has brought industry to the negotiating table in Washington has been the actions taken by companies to address chemicals in their products. For years, as we've been increasing pressure on Congress to act, we've also been working with companies to identify and move dangerous chemicals off the shelves. By working with leading corporations, we work to demonstrate that it's not only politically possible, but technically and economically feasible to bring safer products into our homes and onto the market. So that's why we're working with leading companies makes such a real complementary strategy to our effort. We prove what's possible in the marketplace, and we build a case for policy change to solve this problem at scale. And here, I think there's really good news. From retailers to product manufacturers and chemical companies, I think we're at a moment of real change in the marketplace. We all want to know or feel assured that the common household products, such as shampoo and hand lotions or cleaners, are safe. And the reality is that we're clearly not alone. Consumers from around the globe are just demanding simpler, safer products, and companies are paying very close attention. So our big breakthrough in working with companies on chemicals came about 2 years ago, when after many years of effort, EDF guided Walmart, the world's largest retailer, in becoming the first to announce a comprehensive policy to identify and phase out targeted harmful chemicals from products sold on its store shelves. This was a major achievement after spending many years urging the company to take such a commitment. Walmart's chemicals policy applies to tens of thousands of household and personal care products, products like lotion and shampoo, as well as cleaners that we use every day and are worth billions of dollars in sales to the company. Given Walmart's size and purchasing power, the company's actions are really having a ripple effect across the marketplace and making changes that go well beyond Walmart's store shelves, helping make products safer really wherever you shop. Now we're working to put that policy into action, and EDF's unique combination of science and supply chain and business expertise has helped position us to develop this robust policy with Walmart that we can now take to other retailers and companies. We've recently launched a new initiative called Behind the Label, a blueprint for safer chemicals in the marketplace. This project defines and sets expectations for industry leadership on chemicals and gives the guidance and resources for achieving success. We're also now expanding our efforts to tackle a whole new category of products, food. Food additives are chemicals that are used for a variety of reasons, to color foods, to make them more stable on shelves, to improve their consistency, to add flavor. Many of the chemicals now used in foods didn't exist 50 years ago. And here again, unfortunately, the regulatory system has just not kept up with the 21st century diet. And today, top officials at the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, the agency that's in charge of food additives, have publicly admitted that they cannot ensure the safety of chemicals used in food. So that's why we're starting to work with leading grocers, including Walmart and others, to develop leadership positions on chemical food additives that will make food safer available to all Americans. Today, there are more than 10,000 chemical additives allowed in food, including well-known hazards like phthalates and bisphenol A or BPA that enter the food primarily through packaging, and only about half of these have ever been tested for safety. And more problematic, companies are using a loophole in the law that basically allows them to introduce nearly 1,000 new chemicals without even notifying the federal government. We're seeing the market shift here as well, as food companies and retailers are scrambling to address consumer concerns about chemicals in food. People across the country are demanding simpler, healthier, quote-unquote clean food. Probably many of you have read about food scares like yoga mat plasticizers in Subway bread, or certain kinds of carcinogens in Pepsi's caramel coloring. More recently, major companies like General Mills have announced plans to restrict artificial ingredients. So with that momentum, we are reaching out to grocers around the country to push them to take leadership and action on this issue, to develop policies that systematically address this problem. And this means expanding our partnership with Walmart. Similar to household and personal care products, we just see a tremendous opportunity to leverage the power of the supply chain to improve the safety of food on store shelves today and build pressure for improved regulatory system tomorrow. So for too long, we've been putting chemicals into the market and into our bodies with little or no oversight, little to no evaluation of the long-term health impacts. We've retroactively sought to restrict the worst of the worst, while hundreds of hazardous chemicals continue to be produced in huge volumes. So we're working to reverse this trend by securing stronger laws, working with companies, and advancing scientific understanding. We can help put safer products on the shelves, safer food on our plates, and safer air quality in all communities across the United States. Because I want to build a future where I can assure my daughter that she doesn't have to worry or wonder about the hazardous chemicals in the food she eats or the products she buys. So when I tell people about the problems of chemicals in everyday products, many ask me what can they do to protect themselves and their families? What should they buy? What should they avoid? And the truth is that while there are some modest steps we can all take each day to limit our exposures, we can avoid microwaving in plastic or use HEPA vacuums to reduce toxic flame retardants in our homes, we simply cannot shop or clean our way out of this problem. When we step outside our doors, there are chemicals in the environment and the communities that we live in that are beyond our immediate control. That's why we need collective change through leadership from companies and strong national protections for all of us. It's really not an exaggeration to say that the health and well-being of our children and their children are at stake. So I'll end with that, and I really look forward to the questions and answer session.
Great. Thank you so much, Sara. I just want to leave this slide up on the screen for just a second for the folks in the audience. We often, when we have these webinars, are asked what can we do to support the work, and we just have 3 URLs there that can kind of get you started. One is directly to our EDF Health page, so it's edf.org/health. And then we have our EDF Health Facebook page, which is facebook.com/EDF Health. And our Twitter feed for the health program is twitter.com/EDF Health or just @EDF Health. So I'll just leave that on the screen for just a quick second. Folks want to take those URLs down and jot them down as a way to connect with the program. I think that's a good place to start. With the time that we have remaining, we're going to obviously turn this over to the questions that you all have from the audience. We'll try to get to as many of them as time permits. And again, I am going to move off this slide now, and I'll just remind folks that we are recording this, and we'll get this around to all participants, so you'll have the chance to take down the URLs and sort of review this presentation in full. I'm going to move on to this slide here again to remind folks how to submit questions. You have the Q&A box that should appear in the upper right-hand corner. You can just submit your questions in the text box. If you're not seeing that for whatever reason, down in the middle at the bottom row there, you can see the Q&A red button that you can press to bring that text box up. membership staff are standing by. We have 7 or 8 questions already in the queue. And in fact, I'll just move directly over to the first one from Sean, who asks, why do you think these companies are interested in making these changes now? Do you think Walmart and others will really make good on their commitments?
Well, thanks for that question, Sean. I think the companies are reacting to a number of different things. I think they're reacting to pressure from grassroots campaigns, social media campaigns. They're reacting to consumers who are actually making their voices heard through multiple different kinds of outlets. They're getting pressure from state action around the country where they're having to deal with different regulatory regimes. They're also dealing with a different global marketplace. So we've seen this sort of an evolution in their thinking, in that they realize that actually getting out ahead of this problem makes a lot of business sense. That's an argument that's actually played well in conversations with business, and that these issues aren't going away. You can't just deal with a couple chemicals and think your problem is solved. And so that's been another major shift. We're working really hard on the second part of your question to hold Walmart accountable for the commitments they made. That's part of a commitment that we have here. Part of their policy is to report on their progress in the next several years, so stay tuned.
Great. Thank you. The next question comes from Robin, who asks, you said there are chemicals in food that they are not even telling the federal government they're using. Is that really true?
I wish it were not. The loophole I mentioned is it comes from the law wherein Congress said, the law was passed in 1958. This is a different law than the TSCA bill, and it regulates chemicals added to food. And at the time, Congress made explicit that those compounds that, quote unquote, would be generally recognized as safe, so think of things at the time like salt and vinegar, that those could just be used in food without notifying the FDA. What's happened in the subsequent half century is that the system at FDA has become pretty slow and log-jammed, and so companies have found a way around that by basically self-certifying chemicals as generally recognized as safe. The acronym folks use in the business is called GRAS. Most recently, just last week, you may have seen in the papers that the FDA made a decision that trans fats, which had been self-certified essentially as GRAS, will now be regulated by the FDA.
Great. We did have a couple of people point out that when I showed the slide with the URLs, that maybe the URLs were not appearing clearly. I just want to assure people on the call here that we will absolutely email out all of those URLs and get other materials out to you over email as early as tomorrow, and even a link to this presentation so that you all can have it. So we'll move on to the next question, which is, what is the state of assessment of risk of exposure to endocrine disruptors? And that's from Robert.
So there's a lot of different things going on in this space. So here in the United States, Congress had directed the EPA to actually set up an endocrine disruption program. It's been very slow in getting started, but they are doing their first set of evaluations on pesticides. Again, it's far behind, but they're actually going somewhere. This is a heavily debated issue in the EU, where they're taking steps to evaluate chemicals according to their endocrine disruption properties, because that's outlined in the law there. And there's been a lot of debate about what will define an endocrine disruptor. It's a debate that's been going on a long time. I'm afraid with no absolute resolution. But I think because the science has gotten so much stronger in this space, we're going to start to see that change over the coming years.
Okay. The next question is from Lily. What do we know about the use of toxic chemicals in medicines or used by pharmaceutical companies? Specifically, how are they used in over-the-counter medicine?
Oh, you're stretching my scope of expertise. There are a lot of chemicals that are used in medicines for similar purposes that they might be, say, in cosmetics or something, for things like preserving the medicine or holding the ingredients in. But I hate to say, it's under a completely different regulatory regime that I'm not an expert on, so I apologize.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. I think it's Michaela is asking, we are aware of adverse impact that BPA poses, but US FDA still recognizes it as generally safe. Why is it so difficult to make the FDA authorities recognize that BPA is harmful?
Well, yeah, I ended up writing a whole book about that. So BPA is no longer allowed in children's bottles. So that FDA did take action on that, of course, only after industry told them to. I think this speaks to challenges that the agencies had in keeping up with the science. The group that oversees BPA is a food additive that oversees chemicals like BPA is pretty small and under-resourced, and the science has changed so rapidly on them that I think that's part of the problem. The issue around BPA has become highly controversial as well, and I think it's made different parties dig in their heels. With that said, the research continues to come out on BPA. The main use that FDA has authority over is in food can linings, and the challenge there really has been finding a well-known safer substitute for BPA in food can linings that also protect the quality of the food.
Okay, great. I'll just pause real quick again to remind folks how to submit questions. We're getting them come in fast and furious, so folks are figuring it out. But just to remind folks that you can submit your question using the Q&A text box in the upper right. If you can't see it, press the red Q&A button at the bottom, and it should appear. Hopefully you can get your question in, and hopefully we get to them. So the next question comes from Leanne. Could you recommend research journals that I could read to find out more about everyday chemicals that have been found to have negative long-term health effects?
Yes, Leanne. I think really the best resource, especially if you're starting out, is a journal called Environmental Health Perspectives. This is the journal of the National Institutes for Environmental Health Sciences, which is the environmental health branch of NIH here in the United States. They have great research articles, and they also do very nice online sort of summary articles. And it's all free and accessible. Okay,
great. We'll move on to the next one, which is, this is from Jane. What is the number of the bill that will require the EPA to regulate toxic chemicals? The one that is coming up that we just spoke about in the presentation, I guess probably the Vitter-Udall bill.
Yeah, that would be S-697. That's the Senate bill, and the House bill is H.R. 2576.
Okay. Excuse me. So Catherine asks, what can I do as a consumer to protect myself and my family other than taking action with EDF and supporting this great cause?
Yeah. I mean, I think I named a few of them in terms of even the plastics industry has made recommendations not to microwave in plastic. It's one that I think a lot of people still do. There is certainly evidence that if you try to keep the dust down in your house, particularly using a HEPA filter because it captures the dust and doesn't send it into the air, which is problematic, you can actually do some good in reducing the flame retardant chemicals that actually build up in the dust. Another favorite, just simple public health measure that helps with both germs and actually with toxic chemicals is washing our hands quite a bit. But it's true that you can have exposure that way. It's challenging to make recommendations about what food you eat and where you procure it, because some contamination of food really happens way upstream in the production of the food. So I don't want to make recommendations in that area.
Okay. We have a question here from Randy. I think this is sort of a political question dealing with sort of the current control of Congress. Given what we're seeing in terms of the control of Congress, how can we get as close as possible to a system where the burden of proof for safety for new chemicals comes prior to their introduction?
Yeah, it's a good question. So under the Senate bill, they actually make some changes to what's called the EPA's new chemicals program by actually mandating that the agency actually has to find an affirmative safety determination, basically, before it comes onto the market. What that means, in effect, is that it does put a burden on the agency, but then a demand for information, ideally, hopefully, a demand for information on the industry to provide to the agency. The control of Congress issue is an interesting one. The reason I gave a little bit of the history of this effort is to show that this has been something that's been a long time in the making. And the dynamics by which the Republicans have control of Congress have, in strange ways, opened the door to moving this quickly, or at least to moving it, in part because I think efforts to strengthen the law by some of the Democrats have actually, they've actually had quite a bit of leverage.
Okay. We've had a couple questions come in about the EU's REACH program, and this one from Sylvia, why can't we just adopt REACH? What makes it, and I think this is particularly interesting, what makes it cost effective for companies to operate under different regulatory regimes in the U.S. and the EU?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. In a rational world, we might do that, and certainly globally that's happening. South Korea has adopted a very similar program to REACH, as has Turkey and several other countries. The United States, I think there's a political dynamic there. We're not about to accept a European regime. I think there's also some questions about the effectiveness of the program, and when we're just starting to see it play out. And the challenge is we have a system already in place, so the idea here is to strengthen it so that we can have a more greater efficiencies. I mean, I would hope that the companies would be building in those efficiencies, and I think certainly one of the factors for why industry has come to the negotiating table and agreed that this bill needed reforming was because they were facing regulatory issues in the rest of the world. Okay.
Janine does have a question about nanotechnology and nanomaterials as they become more prevalent. I know that a few years ago, EDF Health did look into this. I don't know, Sara, if this is a particular area of your expertise, but
yeah. So I can give a pretty generic answer on it. we do have experts here that have dealt with this issue in the past. It's not so much that the issue of becoming more prevalent. I think the challenge in this space is understanding how to evaluate their safety and making sure that we're actually taking into account the right questions about how they may be impacting people's health. It's a more challenging field. You can't just you can't just approach them like you do chemicals. You have to think about their size, and I think that's challenging people.
Okay. I guess I'll take this opportunity again to pause once more just to say that the question text boxes should still be there on the upper right-hand corner, and you can access it and submit your questions. Keep them coming. We have the next question from Shirley, which I think is similar to a question we received a little earlier, which is, can you give the name of magazines again that talk about these chemicals in articles maybe that are that the public can access and
yes. The one I had referenced was called Environmental Health Perspectives. It goes by EHP, and it's the Journal of the National Institutes for Environmental Health Sciences. I think if you just Google Environmental Health Perspectives, that'll come up.
Okay. Randy asks a question in the 1970s, which is sort of the time that we did pass the existing Toxic Substances Control Act. There was a similar outcry about chemicals in our environment, and I guess it's just asking the question: can we enact legislation that counterbalances the pressures that capitalism places on companies for short-term profit over long-term safety? I think that's exactly what we're trying to do.
I mean, Randy, you've gotten to the heart of the challenge. I mean, even at the time in the 70s, there was always this striking of balance between protecting the public's health and basically making sure that we didn't impair our economy. Part of the challenge, chemicals make up 96% of the materials that we use every day. They are completely integral to our economy. And not all of them are, going to kill us. We want a system that efficiently identifies the hazards that we need to deal with and be able to quickly place appropriate restrictions so that we're finding that balance between protecting people's health and keeping the economy going. I mean, we really do recognize that there's a balance there, and part of finding this bipartisan sort of agreement is to wrestle between those two competing needs.
And maybe just continuing on with that line of questioning, there is I know that there's some controversy over the Vitter-Udall bill around the issue of state preemption. And I know that there have been some amendments that have been offered to strengthen the bill. I just wondered if maybe you want to spend some time addressing that point in particular. Sure.
So the other kind of key balancing act on top of the general one that I mentioned was is striking a balance between the ability of the states to act and the federal government. Because TSCA has been, sort of a toothless law, in the interim, states have taken different actions to restrict individual chemicals in specific products. And that has also been a driving force to get industry to recognize that the federal system isn't working for them because they're having to deal with this patchwork of responses around the country. So when they came to the negotiating table, I think David Vitter actually articulated this, that they allowed, that his party and some of his constituents, and he does represent largely large chemical companies, were willing to exchange giving the federal government and the EPA, which you don't hear coming, we are a partisan organization, but I can state by fact that David Vitter would say that he doesn't like the EPA, but they're willing to give the EPA greater authority in exchange for a unified regulatory system. So there's been this challenge of making sure the states can act up until the federal government acts, or until and unless the federal government acts. But both bills that are being considered and the existing TSCA does have what's called state preemption, which means the federal government's decision trumps the states. And that is in part because it's an interstate commerce issue as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I guess maybe continuing on with this theme, Nancy asks a question sort of about the coalition of environmental groups and how we've been working collaboratively, and there are different opinions on the Udall-Vitter bill. Just how are we sort of assessing sort of the views and the positions of other groups as we work towards this passage of this bill?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There are groups in a number of different positions, and I think it's changing all the time. So, for example, the House bill, and let's remember the House is dominated by the Republicans, is, we see it through one lens, which is we see some real problems with it. Others in the environmental community see aspects of it that they actually like better than the Senate bill. So I think you're beginning, it's constantly changing, particularly as the bills have changed, and people see different things that they like in the different legislation, and they see things that they don't like, and that's certainly our case. I mean, there's things in certainly in the Senate bill that we don't like. We think overall it's significantly better than current law. We see there are some good things in the House bill, but overall we see it as weaker than the Senate bill. But what's important is that as we move to get a bill to the president that would actually improve and strengthen our system, that we're all working to get the strongest bill possible. And I think that as things get to that level, we're going to see a lot more cohesion among the communities. But there's always going to be folks that want to hold out the perfect for making progress.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Pam asks a question about, and we do have a lot of members in California and throughout the country, but why does California seem to have more stringent chemical labeling?
So California has something called Proposition 65, which requires the labeling and warning of the carcinogenic and reproductive toxic chemicals. It doesn't restrict those products, but it sort of builds on a right to know. So if you're a Californian, that's why you're constantly seeing that a lot of things around you may cause cancer. If you get on a plane in California, you'll certainly see a sign as you enter the jet. And so that's been part of the great legacy of California. That just as an aside, that Proposition 65 is carved out in perpetuity in the Senate bill that's being considered. The other note is that sometimes these regulations can cut two ways, because California actually also passed a technical bulletin called Technical Bulletin 117 many years ago that was a fire safety standard, essentially written by the chemical industry, that actually created an enormous market for flame retardant chemicals in products that really didn't need them. And in fact, Californians have some of the highest levels of flame retardant chemicals that have ever been reported in the world. They've made changes to that technical bulletin under Jerry Brown, but not all things are, go exactly the right way.
Great. I'm just going to pick up on that. And I know that it's been about 40 years since the passage of TSCA. Over that time, states have had the ability to take action. California has probably led the way in many of these many regards. I think you mentioned in a meeting not that long ago how many chemicals have actually been banned by state action, and
right.
it's over 40 years. It's a very small number.
It's about a dozen. So, and I think in recent years there's been seemed to be an uptick in states. State legislatures in particular passing specific chemical bills. They've been a bit like Me Too bills. So where, for BPA, it's like I've lost track of how many states passed bills. They were good bills to do. They got a lot of bipartisan support. People felt good about it. And, after a number of states have passed something, there's a little bit of momentum. But we count about 12 chemicals and classes of chemicals that have been dealt with by the states in 40 years.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the next question. Steve asks a question about technology. Should we be promoting the use of new technologies for the rapid screening of chemicals that could help address the testing time and the expense of testing?
Well, I thank you, Steve, for that question, because I didn't talk about some of that work that we're doing. We actually think that what Steve's referring to are what are sometimes called high-throughput screenings, where you can test hundreds of chemicals at once against a whole host of different biological reactions and genes. And the idea here is, could you generate a lot of data to begin to fill some of those big data gaps that we have in our understanding about chemicals. We certainly think there's a lot of promise here. There's a lot of potential. A lot more needs to be done. One of the focuses that EDF's been having is building collaborative bridges between the federal government. They have invested millions of dollars in these technologies over the past decade. We're building collaborative bridges between those folks and sort of leading experts in the different biological sciences. So just to give you a quick example, just last week at the University of California, Davis, at their MIND Institute, we brought together leading officials from those federal agency programs with some of the top thinkers and researchers in the field of neurological development, neurological diseases and disorders such as Parkinson's and autism. And the idea there was that they have the expertise to understand the biological system, and the federal government has the tools to help them integrate how do you think about chemicals affecting these diseases. We got them working with some of the tools that the federal government is developing, and it was just a really exciting meeting, and I think there's going to be a lot of great collaboration coming out of that.
Great. Okay, we do have a few more minutes here left of time, so if you keep the questions coming, we do have questions queued up, so we'll get to as many as we can. Bonnie asked a question, and then I want to have a quick follow-up to this question. Since the lining of cans is unhealthy, couldn't we use more glass containers? Could we do things like planting fruit trees or gardening in our backyard to avoid containers altogether? And I think sort of one other sort of take on that is just how maybe you could speak to how many household products do have these chemicals. So it's not just food liners and containers and microwaving plastic, but the various types of materials that we all have in our homes.
Well, so, it's challenging. The food cans were an important invention when they were invented, in the sense that you could actually preserve and store food for a long time. You could transport it great distances and give a lot more people, something a little bit closer to fresh food. We don't think of fresh food as in a can these days, but during the Second World War, when food cans were really taking off, that was an important thing. I think there are some innovations in glass that can help that market. They have certainly lost tremendous market share to plastic and metals, and they are certainly looking to expand into more uses with new technologies that make the glass safer in terms of breakage, reliable in terms of breakage, and then, of course, lighter, because that's a major issue with glass in terms of the energy impact. And I think the reality is if we're going to feed a world of many billions of people, we're going to need produced foods. That's just going to be a reality in my mind. But I certainly am in favor of planting a fruit tree in my backyard.
And maybe just speaking to some of the various other types of products that we have in our homes, and this sort of dovetails with the question that Judy is asking, which is, that when you go to hotels or airports, you have all these air fresheners all around you. It seems like at different times we're sort of swimming in a lot of this stuff. And just
I hear you, Judy. I actually can't stand those things either. I was recently in a hotel, and I won't say what company, but I did write them a note that had a continuous center in the hallway. And I'm not one who's sensitized to these things, but there are a number of people are. But it actually was very annoying. It made me feel a little sick. And they're unnecessary. We're actually doing a pilot project here with some chemical monitors that individuals can wear that can detect up to 1,400 different compounds in their everyday environment. These are very simple silicone wristbands, that, sort of like the ones that people wear for different causes, like Live Strong. We've had just a small group of people pilot these for us to see what shows up in the environment. We're analyzing those results now, but I can tell you we found a lot of fragrances.
Okay, great. We actually, this is not a question, but a comment and just some information. Carolyn is sharing with us that I guess the National Institute of Health has a household products database, and she's sharing a URL which is a little convoluted to read, so we'll just make sure we get this around in the email that we send out. But for folks who are interested in household products, it looks like NIH has a website for us. So one question, and maybe this is a good time to sort of see if this will be the last question that we have time for. So Sara is asking, would these actions on toxic chemicals affect food prices, and maybe prices for other household goods? What would replace the chemicals present in these products?
It's a great question, and it's something that we're very concerned about not causing. One of the reasons that we worked with Walmart and have worked with Walmart is because they have tremendous power to move the market, but also and at scale. And so the notion is, at that scale, can you make change that isn't going to result in high prices for the consumer? And certainly Walmart that's one thing that they really do in terms of making sure they have competitive low prices. It's been an issue in the replacement of BPA in food cans. If you shop at a store that offers quote-unquote BPA-free cans, they definitely come at a higher price. We're really focused on making safer products available to all Americans and not creating niche markets for only those who can afford so-called safer products. So I think working with companies to actually make sure that this is done in a way that that the producers can respond to is trying to keep in check that we're doing this in a way that affects that doesn't result in just sort of high prices and niche markets.
Great. We had one more question, and that came from, I think it was Carolyn, who asked, whether we could put all this up to a national referendum or national vote. I know that different states have ballot initiatives that they pose to their state residents and voters. We don't have anything like that, I guess.
No, we don't.
On the national level.
But we certainly have. We have ways in which we can help make your voice heard to members of Congress. EDF has a political arm of our organization called Environmental Defense Action. We can provide the link to that. It's a separate page where you can take action to let your members of Congress know right now, because they are listening to this issue right now, and keep posted, because you may be hearing about this more in the coming months. I certainly hope you will.
Great, and that is a great point. I think that one of the great things about EDF is that we do have great staff, of course, like Sara here, but we have wonderful and incredible members and activists who do help reinforce and give our issues a voice in Congress. There are many issues, many times members of Congress and their staff say that they don't hear from us enough, which is a problem I'd like to solve. We can make sure that our voices are heard. So this is really great work and really important. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. I just wanted to also just say, EDF, just as sort of my personal view, is EDF is just a great place to work. But just knowing that what we do here is making a difference and changing the world, that we're connected with you all from on this webinar, 44 states and 13 countries around the world, which is really incredible. And so I just want to thank everyone for joining us. And for those of you who are in the United States, maybe just use this opportunity to wish everyone a happy and safe 4th of July holiday next week. And we will be in touch with you with more information and ways to engage on this issue and many others in the future. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Sara, for making this a great event.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you for all the really great questions.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.